Hi, it's Megan in All Writers Welcome, and I'm joined today by author and editor Carol M. Vaughn. Welcome, Carol.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. So glad to have you. So please tell us who you are in a nutshell. What do you do and whom do you help?
Well, in a nutshell, I like to write and I like to read a lot. And I've noticed in all my writing that a lot of authors don't have anyone to help them with their story structure. So I want to help those authors who are trying to figure out, when events should happen and how to make their characters seem more realistic.
Oh, nice. So is that how you started getting into editing, just as in your own writing journey and in your reading journey?
Yeah, it is. I have some friends who are authors that I've helped, and I've noticed that I seem to be pretty good at spotting, like, well, why did they do this? And they say, because I wanted them to.
Oh, yes, that's
Not a good enough reason.
Because it has to for the story arc. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more, because the kind of editing you do is maybe not what a lot of authors know about. I think a lot of authors hear editing and they think it means somebody to tell them they've left out periods or apostrophes or things like that. So tell us the kind of editing you do and what it involves.
So the type of editing I do is developmental editing or content editing. They mean the same thing. And I come before you send your story to beta readers, ideally. And I'm going to take the story and I'm going to be looking primarily at two things: the plot and the character development. I want to make sure there aren't any holes in the plot, and I want to make sure that your characters aren't flat or doing things that seem out of character for them.
And that's something that I think is really hard for authors to see for themselves. So how does that interaction go? Because it's so important, and on the other hand, it's so challenging for us to make those kinds of changes in our writing. So can you walk us through a little bit of the process? How do you work with authors? Those are the things you're looking out for, but how does that process work?
So when they send me their story, I will tell them these are the things I'm looking for. And I'm also going to remind you that you are the author and you are in control of your art. What I am giving you are suggestions that should be considered, but don't have to be done.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give their story a read through, and then I'm going to write down my thoughts after going through it once as a reader. And I'll send them that so they kind of get an overview. And then I go through and I do a second, more detailed commentary in their document.
So nice. So they're getting specific comments that they could just work on revising after your second pass. And I'm really interested. You said you go through it as a reader, and that seems like such an important distinction, because ultimately we're writing to connect with our readers. And so if you're giving feedback and it's saying, hey, from the point of view of a reader, I don't get why this character makes this decision. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense to you, but that must be so powerful for your authors to get from the reader's point of view. But also not just any reader's point of view, a reader who reads a lot, who also writes, and who's tuned in to the mechanics of story, because we all have an opinion, but whether we can turn that opinion into something that is really what story structure needs is the difference.
Well, and it helps to read it as a reader for the author, because they don't always get from their readers after they've published who say, hey, you lost me at this point in the story. I got bored and put it down. But when I go through as a developmental editor and a reader, I notice, like, oh, I've stopped paying attention to the story. I should put a little thing here that says, hey, I zoned out.
Yes, got up to get popcorn and let the book read itself at this point. Yeah. So, as an author, I'm curious, or does being an author shape your approach to developmental editing?
It definitely has, because I didn't know all of the little detail things before that I do now. I've been writing for 4 or 5 years, and I have learned a lot about the words needed, like story structure, and 25% of your story should be introduction, and 75% is the try-fail cycle. And if your character is good at everything, nobody wants to read your story because they can't relate.
Yes.
Different things about where instance should happen. You know, after you've introduced your character, you need a big thing to get them going on their journey. Otherwise, why would they leave home?
So it sounds like you learning about storycraft so that you can improve your own writing is really making an impact on how you can help readers. And I'm sure it also impacts how you provide the feedback, because you know what it is to be an author. And so the way you would give your feedback, you have the knowledge, but the way you present it, I'm sure, would be different as well. Do you think there's something special about the way you give those messages to authors? That's
you need to change this messages.
Yes.
Well, I try to be sensitive because I have received feedback, you know, on my stories, and it's always hard when they're your babies. You know, really, you are taking things that you've kind of kept close to the heart and in your head and giving them to somebody else, and that is so scary. So when I give feedback, I try, even as I'm reading the story, you know, to also point out, like, this was an exciting moment in your story.
Oh, or lovely, yeah.
Along with, as I'm reading, you know, maybe shoot them an email. Hey, I just read this. Why don't you go check out, you know, a character development website or something while I'm reading, to kind of give them a clue of things they can work on.
So it sounds like you stay in communication with your authors as you're working on their books. And do you find that makes a difference in how receptive people are to changes you suggest? Or how do authors feel about you giving them help along the way before you've even finished your read?
Well, the ones I've worked with have really enjoyed it because, you know, you hate sitting there biting your nails, waiting, like, what do they think of my story?
Yeah. Does that mean it's terrible? Yeah. Do they flush it down the toilet?
One day you think it's great, the next day you think it's awful. So by giving them, you know, little things as I'm reading to work on, it just helps redirect them from worrying about what I think of their story to, oh, what a good idea. I can learn more about personality doing this, or I can learn more about story flow reading this.
I love that because it takes the focus back to the story as craft, and it takes the focus away from the author feeling judged, because as you were saying, this is a part of ourselves. This is something so, you know, intimate, and it takes the focus off of a judgment of good or bad. And it's, hey, this is the craft. And what if you delve more into the craft? And also, of course, anytime people are nervous, giving them something specific and practical to do, right? Is the answer. Wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about genre. What genres do you prefer to do developmental editing for? Do you specialize in one genre? What kind of stories do you love to work with?
Science fiction and fantasy. You know, as I've been working, I found out that different genres have different, they call them game changers, or you know, where the incidences happen of sending people on their epic quest or falling in love or whatever. Each genre has a very different structure. So I'm sticking with fantasy and science fiction because that's what I'm most familiar with and what I write personally. And it's the place where I feel I could do the best work.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really specializing and honing in on these are the pieces that a really fantastic science fiction or fantasy story needs to have. And so instead of trying to just generically look at the big view of story, you know, there's a plot and characters, you're like, specific things. So I imagine you have authors that you've worked with who go, oh, I didn't even know that needed to
changed.
Yeah, you're teaching story craft by doing developmental editing, it sounds like. Do you feel that way?
I try to do it because, you know, the more you learn as an author, the less time your baby spends with an editor or somebody else, and the faster you can publish.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure you don't mind having the stories coming to you more streamlined, right? Like you want them to just be, okay, a few quick things and
you're good.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. So tell us a little bit, I want to switch gears. You were talking about your genre being science fiction and fantasy. Tell us some about your books. What are some of the books that you've written, and what are the stories behind them? How did you get into the science fiction and fantasy genre?
Well, my best-selling series is called Totems, and it's a pretty typical, you know, peasant girl accidentally bonds a dragon and then accidentally becomes bride, you know? minor details. And that's the one that I feel most comfortable telling people about. But for you beginning authors who are maybe scared, my first series was about Bigfoot.
Oh, really?
College girl, so that she wouldn't destroy the world. So, that's, my stories tend to be a little bit whimsical. I try to make the odds something that can be terrifying, but I like my characters to be hopeful, because that's what I feel like people need, is hope, that no matter how bad things can get, you can still be a true and good person to yourself and overcome what comes at you.
And that's why we love science fiction and fantasy, right? It's because we get to see the everyday human qualities we admire against a backdrop of really high stakes. There's
the world ending.
Yeah, or Bigfoot coming. But it just makes it easier to see the human beings shine in that when they're placed against the stakes. Oh, how fun. And when you said you have the Totem series, how many books are in that? It is one you're still working on, or is that a complete series?
It's a complete series, the original one. I have several spin-offs, not spin-offs, but like continued trilogy.
Same world?
Yeah, it's a big world, but I have a lot that I can do with it.
Yeah.
But the first 3 books are done, and 2 short stories with it.
Oh, nice. But that's so fun, because once you've taken the time to build that world, it's wonderful to get to explore different parts of it. So I'm curious, so this is kind of now a bridge back to your editing work. When you get manuscripts from authors, is world building and consistency in the world something that you help them with a lot? I imagine that comes up for science fiction and fantasy.
Yes. In my opinion, the world that you build for science fiction and fantasy is part of the plot. It really drives how characters react and what they're going to do. If you're putting your characters in a medieval environment, you've got to look at the social structure, and that's part of world building. If they're in a futuristic, science-y environment, again, you've got to look at how they're going to react to whether or not they can breathe in space, or little things that
does the lack of gravity affect them? Yeah. What are their bones like? Yeah. And I love that, because when somebody puts me in a setting, I really look forward to how will that author use the elements of the setting. And I feel disappointed if I'm someplace cool and I go, but you didn't, nobody ever got to go to the space shuttle, or we didn't have a tournament for the knights. You want to feel like all of that is used. And I imagine that's something that can help authors simplify their plots as well. Is that an issue you ever see with authors? Do they come and they've got so many different things going on and you have to help them focus?
I actually finished a couple months ago another author's manuscript, and that's something that she told me. She's like, I'm just going to send it to you. It's a mess.
Oh,
I'm so deep in the forest, I don't even know where to go anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I read through it and I was like, oh, you've actually repeated this same scene like 3 times. And if you cut this out, it's going to help you a little bit. Oh. And so when I got through, she said she read through the edits and she's like, oh, it makes so much sense. It's a lot simpler than I thought it was. And she just was able to get right back to work and get that smoothed out and flowing again.
That's so powerful, because it sounds like you're providing this outside perspective, but that's understanding where the author is coming from. So it's enough outside to see things that it's hard for us to see when we're in the midst, but it sounds like you're really taking care to understand the author's intention so that it's not, just, take it in a different direction. Let me get you back to your vision.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. I think that's something that we all need. And I'm curious whether you have ever encountered reluctance from authors about getting help with developmental editing. Is that something that comes up? I know it comes up with line editing. Authors just go into panic mode. It's like, I don't want somebody to tell me what's wrong. Does that also happen with developmental editing and story structure?
It does, because sometimes we just love a scene so much, or we love 2 characters and we want to ship them so much. And sometimes they just shouldn't be part of the story. You've heard the term kill your babies, and sometimes the scenes that need to go just to make the story itself more powerful. But it can be hard to do. My Guardian series, which is my Bigfoot series. I had a person come back, and it was the first series I'd ever written, so it was scary first, just giving it to anybody.
Yeah.
And then they came back and they said, your main character is so boring. She doesn't do anything. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's there for the whole book.
Oh, no.
But then I stepped back and I looked and I realized she didn't do it. She was very passive. Things happened to her and she just happened to be along for the ride. And so by having that outside perspective, I was able to change how she played a role in the story and actually became the hero of the story rather than just some poor sap who was dragged along by her hair.
Wow. Well, that sounds very powerful. It sounds like you were able to make the change, but also I love that you're just talking about it and saying, hey, my first series, it's definitely not as good as my next series and as, continue getting better, because you can't write the better book until you write the first book.
Right.
And I think that holds so many authors back. It's, I don't want to put it out until it's absolutely perfect. You have to start where you start and then get better from that. But the more you do it, the more you build your chops. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really powerful to push, as an author, to push yourself to get a book out and not wait.
For the next, for it to be perfect.
Yeah.
And something that indie authors, I primarily work with indie authors, is that we can get our series out and we can go back and edit them again. We don't have to wait for permission to do it again, to change it and to get the next version going.
Yeah.
You usually don't, because you look at it and you go, I did that and it wasn't my best work now, but it was my best work then.
Absolutely.
And it's okay. Yes. And I'm just going to keep moving forward rather than
the author who has the only one book for her whole career because she keeps going back and trying to make it better. Oh my God. Yeah. Can you share with us a story maybe of the difference that developmental editing can make for an author? We've been talking about, getting it out when it's the best that you can do. But of course, then if you have an editor working with you, it's that one more step because you get it to the best place you can get it. But then if you work with the editor, then it's the best place she can get it to, or she can help direct you to get it to. Is there a story that comes to mind about seeing that real difference in what your role is or what your work does for a book?
My work, I do a lot of challenging questions. I want it to still be the author's work, but I want to help them think about what they're doing. So when I'm leaving comments in their document, I'll say, hey, why is this person reacting like this? This seems out of line to me. And I let them look at it and fix it. But also by reading through the story the first time, one that I'm working on right now, her main problem, she doesn't actually introduce to the story until about the 75% mark of her story.
Oh, wow.
And so assuming she, takes my comments into consideration, she will be able to introduce the villain much sooner in the story where it needs to be, so that the reader's not going, wait, but you didn't defeat the other bad guy you introduced. They'll be able to understand better how everything flows. And to be honest, her story is going to take some restructuring. Yeah. But it's a good story. She's got a solid idea there. She just needs to rearrange a couple of scenes to make it relate better to the reader.
And we all have to revise, right? And so it's just a matter of if you know where that's going and why. I mean, that would be very powerful instead of, okay, I wrote this draft and now I think it's okay. What should I do with it? Well, that sounds like the difference between people continuing to read and not, frankly. I mean, I was hearing you say not until you're 3/4 of the way done with the book do you know what the really big challenge is. Well, what is drawing somebody to continue reading? That's the kind of book we put down. Yeah. And it's definitely not the kind of book we leave a positive review for, right? Yeah. So I
was going to say, and that's the other advantage of working with an editor versus working with just having a friend read it, because friends sometimes have the best intentions, but they may not understand the craft like an editor does.
Right.
And they also might be more reluctant to hurt your feelings.
Sure.
Say, no, this is not the best story.
Yeah. But even if they're willing, not everybody can put into words the reason something's not working. A lot of people who read a lot will have an intuition. They'll get to a passage and they'll go, for some reason, this is off.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to put that into words and go, this is off because, and then, otherwise the author doesn't know how to move forward, right? Just the message of this is off doesn't, it doesn't
get frustrated. Well, you just don't understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes. You need to just see it the way I see it. Yeah, absolutely. How can an author get the most out of working with a developmental editor? You were saying it should be before beta readers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So at what process or what stage should the manuscript be at before it comes to you so that it really is the best use of the author's time, and your skill?
I'm asking, so we have NaNoWriMo coming up, National Novel Writing Month, and it's where you write your story in 30 days for anyone who doesn't know. Don't send me your manuscript on December 1st. It is not ready.
All through November.
Right?
Yeah.
Ideally, you'll get through, I call that the vomit draft, because really you are just throwing the story out before you get scared and stop, or before you get distracted or whatever. And then you need to go through it at least once more before you send it to me. Some developmental editors would ask for more, and some authors might prefer to do it more. That's fine. I would just like them to go through at least one more draft after, I guess the professional term is zero draft.
Okay, yeah. the VD, the vomit draft.
Yes.
Well, that's very generous, because then it looks like you're taking things where they will still be pretty rough. I mean, even if something has taken one more pass after the initial idea has come out in all its chaotic glory, there's still going to be a lot of holes, probably a lot of inconsistencies, things that could be smoother. But that also means that the author is probably getting a really the author's time is used really well, because she's not starting to revise and refine things that maybe aren't going to end up in the final draft.
Yep. Or they need to be moved, because sometimes you need to move an entire scene from the end to the beginning, and you have to make sure that the words around it make it fit there. And
yes.
The end on page 4 of your 400-page manuscript.
Oh dear, yeah. But that is a huge time saver. We talk to so many authors in All Writers Welcome who spend forever revising, and really the reason they're doing it is because they don't have a goal, they don't have something they're working toward as they would have if they had specific feedback, or they do the little stuff first and then the big stuff. They polish and polish and polish this one spot, and they go, oh, that doesn't even belong in the
paragraph that I've spent months on.
Yeah. Oh. Carol, what's your favorite part about editing?
I love stories. So getting to read a new story is my favorite part. And there are plenty of readers out there. So if anyone is worried about sending it to an editor, don't. We have our own ideas. You don't need to worry about them stealing it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I just love to read.
Yeah. And to be part of a story, it sounds like, too, to see how it could be improved and could be better. I mean, it's like a master crafts person where you see it and you go, oh, but if it had these, filigrees on the end, it would be even better. And then you can, the author can take it or leave it. Do I want filigrees or not? But it sounds like it's about honoring the story. The story comes to you and you're like, how could I honor this? Well, right now the protagonist is not doing enough, or whatever the issue is, but the story becomes primary. And then that should be so exciting for an author. That should be the opposite of scary. It should feel so comforting.
Yes.
Because, here's somebody who knows story and knows my world, and you've taken the time, going through it twice. That sounds super, super fun. So I have a kind of a wacky question for you. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
If you had a time machine and you could go back to the time when any book was being written and be part of the developmental edit process for it, which book would you love to have a hand in shaping?
My honest answer is they're famous for a reason. If I touched them, what if I messed them up?
Oh no.
Because they're already so good.
Yeah.
But if I had to pick one, it would probably be Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, intriguing.
Originally,
not science fiction or fantasy. Yeah.
not. Well, it seems little fantasy to me just because of the whole girl who's really a nobody ends up marrying the guy who's a big somebody.
Sure, it's the romance fantasy
It's a
as
romance
opposed to
fantasy.
the dragon
Yeah,
fantasy.
I guess that's funny. Because, you know, when I first read it, I thought, oh yeah, this is kind of a good story. And then I looked deeper into it and I'm like, they go off on so many tangents. You know, before long, you know, the reader is like, okay, she's writing another letter to somebody that we haven't seen in so long that we don't even care about her anymore. You know, I mean, people care about it now because they know the story so well.
That's a good point. But we have the feeling toward it that it's a story we know well and it's a classic, and maybe people didn't even get exposed to it the first time through reading. Maybe they watched a movie or a miniseries, and so we accept it because
we already are familiar with it. Yes. Yeah. That would be my thing, is to try to keep her from going on so many tangents.
Ooh. You know what you're saying is sparking this thought about going back to readers being really attached to their, you know, but it has to be in here. Yeah. And for each of us, our book is Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. For each of us, our book is, I know this inside and out and I'm so familiar with it. I'm living with these characters, but it's not a classic to anybody else.
No, that's a really good analogy.
So you need that.
You know it so well that you forget to put in details that nobody else has seen because they're still in your head.
Right. And so you need that outside voice. Oh, how fun. It sounds, I wish I wrote fantasy. So I could send it your
room if you ever decide to dabble.
Oh yeah, so fun. Well, tell us how we can find you, follow you, and get to know more about the work you do.
The best place to find me is on Facebook. Unfortunately, I'm on there way too much. But you can find my author Facebook page, Carol M. Vaughn. And that's the best place to get a hold of me.
Oh, fantastic. Well, wonderful. Remind us where we can find your series as well, your Totem series.
My Totem series is on Amazon. My next series is up for pre-order on Amazon, Kobo, Nook. I went wide with this one, so you can get it anywhere. And it's the Anarchist Rising series that I'm really excited about.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. Oh, eager to check that out. Excellent. Well, Carol, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. I really enjoyed getting to hear about the work you do. It just always excites me to hear from people who are making a safe space for authors to do their creative stuff and say, if you get the creative part down, I'll help you with refining and polishing it. So
thank you. I think what you guys are doing is great with the All Writers Welcome group, and
thanks.
Keep up the good work.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye. You too. Bye.